Welcome to Global Creative Writing, exploring expressive styles of all continents. Today we're learning about Aboriginal folk tales in Australia. We'll talk about their history and their form, and then we'll write a folk tale together. Australia is located in the southern hemisphere, southeast of Asia. It is the only continent that is comprised of a single nation or country. The Australian Aboriginal people are the indigenous people of Australia, the original people of Australia, people who've been living there for more than 50,000 years. Australian Aboriginal folk tales, or Dreamtime Stories, are the oral or spoken form of spiritual dreaming. Dreamtime stories comprise art, the visual form, customs, the practical form, dance, the physical form, music, the acoustic form, totems, the spiritual forms, lore, the cultural form, and lands, the geographical forms. Altogether, they form an all-encompassing mystical whole, the dreaming. The Dreamtime stories are more than myths, legends, fables, parables, or quaint tales. They are definitely not fairy tales for the amusement of children. Dreamtime stories are the oral textbooks of the Aborigines' accumulated knowledge, spirituality, and wisdom from when time began. The storyteller custodian's role was really that of a cultural educator. While they are fascinating to hear, the structure and form of a traditional Dreamtime story is quite unique. A Dreamtime story of 10 minutes length can cover several topics and subject matters and be suitable for all age groups. They are structured with valuable lessons for children or for bringing renewed understanding to older people. For instance, 20 or more lessons can be found in a single story, teaching such subject matters as the spiritual belief system, customs, animal behavior and psychology, land map of the region, hunting and gathering skills, cultural norms, moral behaviors, survival skills, and food resources. Every genre of storytelling and hundreds of categories are used within Dreamtime stories. The rainbow snake is an example of a creation story.
The Rainbow Snake by Beck Clark. At the beginning of time, before anyone or thing walked on the earth, everything was flat. There were no mountains or rivers. One day the great rainbow snake woke up and crawled out of the ground. The rainbow snake went all over the earth, her great winding tracks following her everywhere. She eventually returned to the land she woke up from. Rainbow Snake called out to all of the frogs that were storing all the water during their sleep and tickled their tummies with her tickly snake tongue. All of the water filled up the rainbow snake's giant winding tracks and made all the rivers, lakes and oceans. With all of the water, all of the animals, birds, insects and plants were created following the rainbow snake. The rainbow snake made rules that everyone must follow, like the law to take care of the land, Mother Earth. All that followed law were made human. All that did not follow the law were turned into stones and rocks, hills and mountains. That is why it's always important to follow the law and look after Mother Earth, and then everyone lives together happily. Hi, my name is Beck Clark. I'm a Darug Nudgery woman. a descendant of many great Aboriginal women, including Mildred Saunders, Martha Hibbs, and Alvana Everingham. There are many different dreamings of the rainbow serpent. This is one from my family, passed down through the generations.
The Aboriginal community regularly sat under the stars at night around the campfire, following their evening meal, and listened to storytellers unfold the stories from the Dreamtime, or told of daily happenings, such as hunts or battles. The written word was unknown to these people, so the Aboriginal culture was an oral one. The storyteller's role was not just to entertain, but to preserve their culture while educating the growing generation of children and young adults in the history, traditional values, and lore of their people. Often the aunties told children's stories to help protect them from dangers, both inside and outside the boundaries of the camp, and to enforce the taboos and traditions of the clan. Women took the girls aside and taught them their roles as wives and mothers for the next generation. Many secret women's stories were passed on at this time, stories that men could not be told. The men taught the young boys stories of hunting, teaching vital information about survival and bushcraft that were embedded in the stories they told. Storytelling also played its part in the sacred initiation ceremonies where secret information was passed on to young boys approaching manhood. Women were not allowed to know these stories. When telling the children's stories, the storyteller gave no explanation of the meaning of them. All the stories they told carried hidden knowledge, which reached down to a much deeper level of understanding. Aboriginal storytelling is similar to the peeling of an onion. Familiarity with the story peeled away different levels of knowledge until finally the vital information contained in the story would unfold. When people heard the stories again, they were asked to repeat them to one another, and gradually, with repetition, came understanding. Often a storyteller told stories of how the figures of animals and people they saw amongst the stars above them came to live in the sky. Through stories, they identified important stars that helped them navigate their way around the country. Some were space stories that explained the arrival of showers of meteorites. Through stories, they learned the habits of all living creatures, animals, birds, fish, insects, and plants. Stories which explained the creatures' behavior in certain seasons, like how they fed or how to track them when out hunting for food. Through story, they learned which berries and fruits were safe to eat and when they were ripe for harvesting. Stories told of the wild forces of nature, such as the whirly winds, violent electric storms, floods, and bushfire, and how best to survive them, while other stories warned listeners of the dangers of witchcraft, magic, and poisons. The storyteller custodian is very skilled and holds a highly respected place in Aboriginal society. The stories they tell have to be sufficiently entertaining to hold their audience's attention. Here's a video of 3 Aboriginal storytellers.
Hi boys and girls, what we're doing today, we're talking about the Dreamtime and what it actually is. See, that's a very personal thing because there's 600 totally different Aboriginal tribes in Australia. So that means 600 languages and at least 3,000 plus dialects inside those languages. So if one Aborigine tells you that's a Dreamtime, well, that's his opinion, and there's many different versions. So to me, I guess I could say the Dreamtime is never ending. It's what happened in the past, how things came to be. It's what's happening now and what is to happen in the future. A lot of people think the Dreamtime is how things were created, just like in other spiritual or religious beliefs. That's a good point too. You've got different stories. One that I can share with you is, and what I understand of the Dreamtime is how things came to be, is right at the start of creation, all the land, it was flat. And then out of the skies came what we call a Gurria, or Gurria, the rainbow serpent. And it was pregnant, or inside of its belly it had all of creation. And And as it came down, first of all, it gave birth to the rivers and the lakes, and then it started creating the trees and the plants and eventually the animals, shaping the rivers, the waterways and the big mountains. And then eventually came the first human beings. And here to tell another version of what he thinks the Dreamtime story is my good friend and mentor Tukabi.
Hello, boys and girls. How are you today? That's good. We were all moulded in one part of the dreaming, or what we call the Jugurba. We were all moulded from the earth, and we all gave Wangan. We all got speech, or Lila. We were given a song, and with that song came the medicine, and the medicine, the story for the country. We believe that we come from the country because we were moulded, given birth from her, and when we finish up, or when we pass on, we go back to her. We become a part of her. So that's another way of saying, talking about the dreaming. And the songs are very important. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. And when you sing all the songs, you're putting all the little jigsaw puzzle together, and it becomes a big map, and the map is Australia.
See, before you had compass or you had fancy things like GPS, you only had songs. Now, when you hear and see Aboriginal people dancing and telling their stories and singing, you could tell pretty much from whereabouts in Australia they're from. For example, they are the melodies of the ocean and the mountains in far north Queensland. My people, because the landscape moves like that. So like my brother Turtle Tukabi was saying, inside of the songs you have information, and inside of the songs you might be told to stop here and make a camp. You might be told inside the songs that this is where you find food, this is where you find water, and this is where you find shelter. So if you know your language, then you know your song. If you know your song, you'll never get lost, you'll always find shelter, you'll always have food and water. So that is another small aspect of what the Dreamtime is. So now let's make sense of it all. This is a song from my grandma's people, and it's talking about Gurriya, or Gurriya, the rainbow serpent. And when I say the word Gunmali, it means to make. And I say Gunmali, Gabanyamba, we're going to make the sweet mother. Because that's what most people's idea of the Dreamtime is, how things started. Look at any different religion. It always talks about how things came to be. Okay, so we're going to tell a story about the rainbow serpent creating everything. And here's my good friend Norm on what we call Yidaki, commonly known as the didgeridoo. Now, this is Tukabi's version of a different creation song from a different part of Australia.
When one is searching for a particular Aboriginal story, their storytelling appears complicated because there are hundreds of ways to tell the same story, depending upon the people, the land region, the type of country, and the creature's habitat. For instance, there are as many different versions of how the kangaroo got her pouch as there are of Cinderella in the European culture. It is courteous, if you find an Australian Aboriginal story you wish to tell, to always attempt to find the source, and if possible, ask permission from the Aboriginal elder to tell it. Here is a creation tale told with animation, made in 2016 in Victoria, Australia.
In the time before time, the great ancestor spirit, Bunjil, began to create the world we see around us. The mountains, the lakes, the forests and rivers, the plains and seas. He created all the plants and all the animals.
When he had created the beautiful sandstone ranges of Garrawird, he often took the form of Werper the eagle, so that he could view his work. He looked over the cliffs and the mountains. He listened to the sound of water, dripping after rain and thundering over waterfalls. He watched the plants and animals grow, from moss and tiny blades of grass to tall, sturdy gums, from birds that flew to animals that burrowed.
Bunjil had a special place near Garrawird. From there he could look out over the ranges with his two helpers, two Werrigan or dingoes. Bunjil appointed two brothers, the Brambolt brothers, sons of Druck the frog, to finish the task he had set himself. Their job was to bring order to the new world, to name the animals and creatures, to make the languages and give the laws. At the end of his time on earth, Bunjil rose into the sky and became a star. He remains there to this day, the protector of the natural world, his people and their beliefs. Meanwhile, the Brambolt brothers had a big job, sorting things out here on earth. There was a huge, ferocious emu called Chingle, who lived on the flesh of people and animals. His home was in the Malik scrub. He was hatching an enormous egg. One day, while Chingle was away from the nest, Wah the crow flew past, feeling hungry. Wah decided to have a peck at the egg. He was pecking away quite happily when Chingle returned. The monster emu was furious. Wah fled across the country towards Garrawird, with Chingle right behind him. As he approached the ranges, Wah saw a crack in the mountains ahead. He flew into it, thinking he would be safe from Chingle there. But Chingle rushed at the mountain and struck it at a mighty blow with his foot. The mountain split open under the force of the impact, releasing a mountain stream and creating a gap, Barraga, also known as Rose's Gap. The emu could now see Wah flying off towards the west. He chased him through Barraga right to the other side of the range.
Wah spoiled another rock in the rock face. Desperately he tried to hide in it, but again Chingle developed a mighty kick to the rock and split it right open. This is how Jananaji Nyawi Victoria Gap was formed, where Bugger Glenelg River passes out onto the Western Plains. With the sun low on the horizon, Chingle decided to make his camp at the foot of the new gap. That is why the place is called Jananaji Nyawi, which means there the sun will go.
The next morning, Crow rose early and escaped to the nearby Murra swamp, as this was his totem site and therefore sacred territory. Jingles was forbidden to follow him there.
Jingle was angry and he was also very hungry. Just at this moment he spied a man, Bunya, out hunting in the distance. He decided to make a meal of him. When Bunya, who was not very brave, realised the emu was after him, he took off as fast as he could. Instead of using his spears to protect himself as a warrior should, he threw them to the ground and scrambled up a large tree. Jingle, not being able to climb, decided to wait. He knew that Bunya would have to come down sometime.
Meanwhile, while the crow flew north to where the Bram Bolt brothers were, he told them of his narrow escape and of Jingle's ferociousness. Already angry at him for his wrong deeds, the two brothers decided to punish him.
They came down to the mountains and saw what they thought was a bright shining star. It was Jingle's eye. Approaching the bird from a different direction, the brothers creeped up and threw their spears. One struck the emu in the chest, one in the rump, one in the neck. Jingles raged and stormed at the brothers, but he was fatally wounded. He ran off towards the mountain plains, losing blood all the time. Soon he died, and the trail of blood he left behind him turned into the Wimmera River.
Bram Bolt now approached a tree where Bunya was hidden. They told him to come down. Bunya was too scared and called back, and he would stay there until they made sure Jingle was dead.
The older brother was angry at such cowardice. He waved his spear and caused Bunya to become a possum, telling him he'll always stay in the treetops and to hunt for his food only at night. Reaching the spot where Jingles had died, the brothers plucked all the feathers from his body, splitting each feather down the centre. They threw one half to the left, the other to the right, making two piles of emu feathers, each the size of the present-day emu. The splitting of the feathers can be seen in all emus. The feathers are doubled with two separate halves.
After feasting on Jingle's flesh, all the people travelled to collect his egg. It was so big and heavy that no one could lift it until Bambaball the wattle bird come along. He was very strong and managed to carry the eggs to Horsham, where it was cooked and made into a great feast. Bambaball had the honour of dishing it out, and in doing so he splashed himself with some of the yolk, creating the wattles on the side of his head.
Before leaving, Bram Bolt ordered the two emus to divide their large eggs into several small ones in the future, so they wouldn't be as jealous of their one egg as Jingle has been. In this way, they hope to keep the peace.
Now, if we look at the Southern Cross, you can see the story told in the stars. At the head of the cross is Bunya, the timid possum. 3 of the stars are the spears hurled by the Bram Bolt. The large western star is the spear that struck Jingle in the chest. The smaller star next to it is the spear that passed through his neck. And the star at the bottom of the cross is the spear that struck him in the rump. Jingle himself is the dark shape that lies next to the Southern Cross. The eastern star of the cross is Druck, the mother of the Bram Bolt, and the 2 brothers are the pointers of the Southern Cross, while the crow is at a safe distance on the other side of the sky as the star we know as Canopus.
So now let's write a Dreamtime story together.